I was just saying, oh, okay, good. I think you've said before that your favorite use case for ChatGPT is summarization. What is your second favorite use case?
I mean, this is sort of like a cheating answer, but my second favorite one is watching how much other people love it and the wide variety of what people are doing with it. It's way more than we ever imagined. I think this is something that often happens with general purpose technologies, but seeing the degree to which people use it for all sorts of things has been a real delight.
Great. So we had a lot of questions on, what the future of AI will look like. How should we expect progress on frontier models like the GPT family that you guys developed to progress in the future over the next decade, however long that you can see?
We don't see a limit yet. I think this is one of those things that the world is still coming to grasp with. That the scaling laws involved in these models are so powerful and so predictive, and we don't see any indication that they're leveling off. So I think progress will continue to be immense. This week we launched some of our multimodal features. People seem to really love them. The models will definitely get smarter and more powerful over time. And I think we're on sort of like what I imagine it felt like when transistors were in the height of their Moore's law phase, and just every 18 months things were dramatically better.
Yeah, that's rapid. Your lab's mission is to create artificial general intelligence. I'm sure much of our audience has heard this term, but some may have not. So could you maybe just define that briefly for us and maybe say a bit about how your views of what AGI could look like have evolved over the past few years?
Yeah. Look, I think we're getting close enough to it that the definitions really matter. It used to just be this like hand-wavy thing where people would be like, oh, someday there's going to be this thing called AGI and it's going to be great and powerful and it'll be really general and really smart. And now there's people who say, well, GPT-4 is pretty general. And there's a lot of people who say it's not close. Anything that would be AGI-like is very far away. But I think we're kind of getting to a point where we really need to talk about specific capabilities, not AGI as a general concept, because it's too squishy now. I'll talk about two categories of things there. One, right now, the system can do a lot of tasks for people, but there's many tasks they can't do. And there's many tasks they can do sometimes, but not reliably. And so you can use these systems to write code, but it doesn't always work, and you've got to check it a lot, and sometimes it's totally wrong. When you can give a system a complex coding task and trust that it'll come back and be accurate, where it's not just like something that would take you a few minutes to do, but maybe a few days or a few weeks, that would be an example of like one threshold. Another, which is one that I always talk about and important to me personally, is when these systems can help you generate new scientific knowledge. That will be, I think, a very world-changing moment.
If we get to a world in which both for doing sequential tasks that are complex, like the first category described, can do science, and let's say those capabilities come with a lot more. Some people frame AGI as a world in which the models can do almost everything humans can. So I wonder, what do you think humans will do 20, 30 years from now, however far in the future you can see?
This is like one of the great conversations with every technological revolution. People always say, well, after we have had at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, people would say, after we have machines that do all of our work, what are humans going to do? Like, we can't imagine it. What's going to happen? And it probably would have been really hard then to sit around and imagine computers and jobs like AI researcher. And equally so, I think right now it's hard to really imagine the jobs on the other side of the AI revolution. But clearly, human demand, desire, creativity, hope, desire for status, this seems to be unlimited. So we'll find new things to do. They'll probably be difficult to imagine from the world today. Some of them may seem silly to us today. But there's like a big universe out there, and a lot of wonderful things for us to go explore in the space of human creativity and potential. I really deeply believe that if you give people better tools, which is what we try to do, they just do more and more amazing things. The possibilities increase, the expectations increase. And that's the way of the world here.
Over the next decade, which specific fields do you think will be most impacted?
I mean, I hope a lot of them. Some that I'm particularly excited about. I think what's happening with education right now is really remarkable to watch, and the ability for people to learn better, to sort of do more, to use this as a new tool alongside human teachers. That's quite amazing. It's earlier days, but I'm very excited for what will happen with medical care. I mentioned scientific discovery earlier. Certainly personal productivity on many axes. We see this today the most with coders, which is why I use it as the example, but I think we're going to see it in most categories of knowledge work here relatively soon. So I'm very excited about that.
Earlier, you mentioned you're very optimistic about continued progress. Let's say, I don't know, 5, 10 years from now, progress slows down. Maybe that's unlikely, but if it does, what do you think will have been the most likely reason?
We stopped finding the new ideas. Research is hard. I think it's easy to take for granted the fact that humans are so amazing at discovering new knowledge and almost expect it, but it only happens because people work really hard and get a little lucky. And I don't think we should ever take that for granted.
Yep.
There's a lot of other things too. We have to figure out how to make enough chips and get enough energy, but I believe we'll do those, and we just gotta keep pushing the science.
Yeah. Well, one bottleneck that's commonly brought up, but maybe surmountable, is data. And I know you've talked about maybe machines can create data for us in the future. I wonder if you could also imagine a world in which, because we need the models to do tasks that interact with the real world, we'll have to put sensors everywhere because we want to, understand how every job is done. Could you see that happening?
Well, yeah, on the data point, I mean, we know that humans can get really smart without a huge amount of data. Now, maybe you can argue that in the outer loop of evolution, there was a massive amount of data, but in any case, I think we have existence proof that we can train a neural network, biological in this case, with a limited amount of data. And I believe we'll figure that out too. On the sensors point, yeah, maybe, but think how much work can happen at a computer, with a keyboard and mouse and monitor. Maybe we don't need as many sensors as we think.
Interesting. You brought up chips earlier. So one of your other big endeavors besides OpenAI is with Helion, which does nuclear fusion for audience members who don't know. And you've talked about the two macro trends of the coming years being the declining cost of energy and intelligence. How tied together are those? If energy prices don't come down or they go up for whatever reason, what would happen to AI progress?
Okay, so first of all, I try not to make predictions about macro trends in the future. Those are the two things that I think would be great, and those are the two things that I hope will happen. But they require a tremendous amount of work to get there, and I and other people could totally be wrong. But if we can get those done, I think that's really wonderful, and I think that those are the two high-order inputs to having a great quality of life and continued progress. But I'm not saying that they're definitely gonna go down to zero and that we have no work left. We have an enormous amount of hard work. I think that if everything else works, the cost of intelligence should be very dependent on the cost of energy, because once chips are cheap and data centers are plentiful, you've still got to run them. So I think cheap energy is good for lots and lots of reasons, but also it helps with cheap intelligence.
Yeah, very interesting. So pivoting a bit to talking about startups and business, because we have a lot of founders and investors here. A lot of startups are currently fine-tuning models, whether they are your models or open source ones. How long will it take for the general models to be so good that fine-tuning is no longer needed?
I think it won't take that long until it's not needed for most things, but it will still make economic sense in a lot of cases. Even if you could just put everything into a prompt, if you're putting in the same thing again and again over super long context length, you might at that point choose to fine-tune a model anyway. So You can already do quite a lot with the models without a fine tune, and that will go up. But there will be a lot of, I think, for a long time, there will be a lot of use cases where it still makes economic sense.
Yeah, makes sense. I think you showed me almost a year ago now a demo of GPT-4. Lots of models have come into the world since then, but it's still the best one. Does that surprise you at all?
A little bit, to be honest. I mean, I would have, yeah, I think we're definitely in the lead, but I guess I would have predicted that we would not have gone a year without a better model from somebody else after GPT-4. But look, I think there's great models coming from a lot of companies.
Yeah. One thing that surprised me, I think, a year ago is it seemed like we were headed to a world in which there'd be one big model to rule them all, and there would be maybe network effects like with social media or search. But it doesn't quite seem like that's happened. It seemed like we're headed to a world that's a little bit more diverse. How do you see that landscape evolving over the next 5-10 years? I realize I'm making you make a lot of predictions, which I appreciate you entertaining them.
Yeah, I mean, as a citizen of the world, I think that's a good thing. Like, of course, as the CEO of OpenAI, I'd like everybody to use OpenAI as a model. But I think it's going to be good that we'll have like a diffusion of this technology and sort of market forces trying different things. So I view that as a positive.
Mm-hmm. How do you see it changing, if at all?
So hard to guess. I mean, I think I would say there will be like less models in the future that are kind of the really frontier ones, but more than a small handful.
Interesting. What % of the value in business use cases do you think comes from being able to do something really well versus having something very general purpose?
You can make it work either way. There are certainly business use cases where you do just want the one super great thing, but more than people realized, and my ChatGPT is an example of this, the pretty good, strong generalist does have a lot of business value. So you want something that can do a lot of things and has all the context. Even for cases where you're like, you know what, I just want this thing to write code, it's still very valuable to have the model have all the world knowledge that GPT-4 does.
Interesting. Yeah, I find ChatGPT is actually more useful for coding in a lot of cases than Codex. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example of it.
We had a lot of questions on regulation and safety and risks. So maybe to start with existing models, what short-term risks are you most worried about?
So I'm going to definitely answer that, and I think it's important. But I want to, in our calls for regulation and risk, I think we have been misunderstood. And we don't actually think that current models are that risky. And we think that an over-regulation of current models would be a real shame. And our intention in calling for this is not about current models at all. I think like what's happening in open source is amazing and should not be clamped down on. Everything we've said about this is focused on the models of years into the future. As we do get into that AGI range, that's where I think we need a different regulatory approach than the world normally takes. And that's where we think the real risks lie. So there definitely are some risks with the models of today. And there's bias, there's misinformation. You can imagine maybe with the models not quite applicable, but pretty soon, people using these for cyber attacks or bioweapons. These are serious issues. But the models of the medium and far future, I think, have their own set of challenges, and it's one of these rare times where we need a true proactive global response.
Makes sense. How long do you think it'll take for us to get to the time where we need that global response? Or should we be doing it right? Should we be setting it up now, I guess?
I think it's better to be too early than too late, and these things take a while. So I think proactive action starting now is a good idea.
Yeah. Lots of people working in the creative industry, artists, musicians, and so forth, are worried about models that can replicate their work create derivatives of them and then ultimately displace them. How do you think we should handle, I guess, the idea of data ownership or data governance moving forward?
Two responses to that. Number one, we definitely want to find models where we pay people. We want to find economic models that everybody is excited about, where everybody wins. And if you're helping train the model, if you're helping improve it, if you're helping like fine tune it, like that all is part of the value chain. And I think everyone should benefit there. But I want to kind of challenge the premise of the question. This is like a new tool that means people can create things in new ways. And of course, people have very understandable anxiety about that. And also, of course, like it will make it harder in some ways to make a living as a creative person. But in many ways, and I personally believe in more ways, it'll make it easier and better, and the quality bar will go up. You can go kind of read about what some visual artists did when the cameras first came out and photography was viewed as this big threat, and then it turned out that we can make amazing new kinds of art with it that we never could before. And I think the same thing is happening with generative AI. Artists, creators have new tools. Some things that were difficult to do before are now easy, and that does have some impact. Many of them great, but some negative. But there's new things that really just weren't possible before with this new and more powerful tool. And I think what we're already seeing is, at a very primitive stage still with these tools, is that the quality of art and the quality of creative output is just going to go up and up.
Interesting. So the role of the artist changes.
Yeah, but it doesn't go away in any way. I think the expectations in some cases go up, the quality and the potential go way up, and it's just sort of like a new, more expansive space. And people can do new, and I think there'll be better things. And the human creativity, the human ingenuity, and the human story, wanting to connect with the human that made this art, that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. You brought up misinformation earlier. I think something like half the world's population is going to be in countries that hold elections next year. That said, we've had many elections over the past year and a half, and GPT and stable diffusion have been around. Do you think the threat has been overhyped?
I always hesitate to say that because the question is not about current models. It's trying to predict 6 months, 12 months from now what it'll be like. What I will say is I think humans are incredibly adaptable, and people are learning fast about this generative AI thing. And as part of that, they're learning not to trust everything they see or hear or read. There was already plenty of that. Photoshop has been around for a while, and people fell for doctored images on Photoshop when it first came out, and then very quickly learned and adapted that you got to apply your own judgment. So I think we're already primed for that, and I think we are gonna adjust here as a society pretty quickly. I think we don't give ourselves enough credit, or we always do give ourselves credit, but say it's, well, the other people are the ones that are going to get fooled and taken advantage of. I think we're all pretty smart.
Yeah. So I was at Bletchley Park on Monday, where they're going to host the summit in a few weeks, and you hinted at this earlier about the need for proactive, global thinking around how to regulate these kinds of things. What concretely would you like to see come out of that?
I would like to see, I'm only one voice here, right? There's like a lot of different opinions, but I personally would like to see something like an IAEA model where for systems above a certain very high power threshold, we have auditing capabilities and safety tests for people training these systems.
Would that look like you have to give over the model to a regulator, they do their own testing, and then they stamp you and you're good to go? Or?
I think there's like smarter people than me about exactly what it should look like. I think that is a good start, but there's got to be ongoing monitoring as well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a bit about innovation as a whole. Something interesting about this wave of AI is it hasn't really been that tied to the venture capital industry. I was in a conversation with some folks just before this about this. You guys started as a nonprofit, lots of funding from Microsoft, DeepMind tied to Google, a lot of academic labs.
Yeah. Well, the numbers are just so big.
Yeah.
and you need it kind of so early on. It's not a perfect fit for venture capital in that sense.
And I guess that's what I was getting at. For a lot of the kind of deep, hard, capital-intensive technologies, do you think it's inevitable that venture won't play a huge role and that we need something different?
I think venture will play a role, but it's like gotta evolve. Like I think venture is getting to the scale where it can do it. I've certainly funded many of the sort of like deep tech companies myself, and I think it's a good model. So I'm like primed to believe this, but I think it is where things are going to go to some degree.
Yeah. Why have you, and I guess Elon is another person who's done this, been able to, I guess, invest in deep tech companies that are capital intensive when others have not wanted to do so?
Well, I think it's easier with your own capital than with LPs, LP money, because it takes a very long time and it's like high volatility. I actually think the risk reward is really good, but it's definitely volatile. So if you're like a fiduciary to somebody else, or if you just are worried that they're going to think you're stupid for many years and not give you more money for your next funds, I think it's harder. So it's like that is a challenge to the venture capital incentive structure, where it's easier if you're investing your own capital.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of startup founders here, and I think the Italian tech scene is small but growing. You ran Y Combinator, and you still invest in startups. What would you like to see being done to grow a new startup ecosystem?
I mean, my personal biased opinion is more hard tech companies.
Your personal biased opinion is more
hard tech companies.
Hard tech companies, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess when you're getting started, though, do you need to? What do you do to kick that off? Is it more? How do you change government policy, or what should people running accelerators do? Yeah.
I actually think it's more about the culture. So like I think that like the Italian tech ecosystem is well positioned to be able to do this, and it's sort of just a choice and a culture. And it did for a long time. It was not the culture of the U.S. tech ecosystem, and now I think it is coming back. It's definitely harder without lots of scaled capital, but that'll come over time.
Yeah. For startups building in AI right now, I think a lot of people worry that you can build something using your API or one of the other foundation model APIs, but the next generation of models will surpass you. What's your advice to startups building an AI?
Yeah, I mean, you have to assume that the models are going to continue to keep getting better, and you want to build a startup that benefits from that, not a startup that is hurt by that. So that's fundamentally it. Like, take it as for granted that that's going to happen, and pick a startup idea and a strategy where that is a tailwind, not a headwind, of which there's many options.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to build, a really generational company where that is AI based, where you're using someone else's technology rather than doing it yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen this in many other cases. Like, it would be almost unthinkable now not to use a cloud hosting service as a startup. And when that first came out, everybody was like, well, you got to have your own colo. You can't trust AWS or whatever. You can't take a dependency on them. So I think this is just like a new primitive in the world. And there will be many of them, and people will, move between them like they move between AWS and Azure and whatever else. But for sure, you can build a business on it.
Yeah. One question I had related to market structure and startups. Do you think the network effects will eventually come back with user interaction data?
Maybe. I'm very interested in the answer to that question, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Were you surprised by how well reinforcement learning from human feedback, and for context, that's when people tell the output of a model whether it's good or bad, and then you can improve its future responses. Were you surprised by how well that worked?
Yes. I don't have like a deep answer, but yes, I was surprised.
Yeah. When earlier you suggested that new ideas would be necessary to keep scaling, what are examples of that? What are the key, I guess, hurdles that new ideas are needed to get around?
It's a little hard to say what they're going to be in advance, right? Like we are the empiricists of the AI research efforts. We don't have the sort of like grand plans and theories to the same degree as others. We will figure this out as we go. But there are always new ideas that you need.
I guess one flavor of that could be around, for example, running models more efficiently. So I think it costs a lot of money to put these models out into the real world. Do you think that cost of running things, is that more important than the cost of training the model from scratch? Or which would you weigh as more important?
It depends on what you're going for. Like sometimes you do just want the smartest possible model, but frequently you want to think about the what optimizes the total amount of compute you'll use entirely. Training the model, inference, everything.
Do those always come together, or sometimes are they orthogonal to each other?
They could be orthogonal. Well, I wouldn't say orthogonal, but you can make very different trade-offs.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe the last question I'll ask, because we're running on time. You have AI. You're working on nuclear fusion. What is your, if you were to tell this audience, startup founders, investors, and so forth, here's how you should position yourself for what's coming ahead. What should they be thinking about? What should they be working on in preparation for these changes?
I kind of think it's going to lift up almost everything. There's always the like, what is still valuable in a world where AI comes? And I've always thought that question is like slightly ill-formed. I think it will just be a massive tailwind across the board. And you can position yourself like a little bit better for that, a little bit worse, but I think it should be like one of the greatest economic booms humanity has ever seen. And those are positive, hugely positive across the board.
Yeah. Do you expect, I guess, GDP growth to, I don't know, double or triple or something like that?
Very hard to say like what money even means and how to properly define it in a world, say, once we get to super intelligence. But so I'll quibble with that as the metric. But I think GDP is always like a proxy metric for the thing we actually want, which is like quality of life. And I expect that to go up very dramatically.
Makes sense. All right. Well, Sam, it was a pleasure to have you. I do have one announcement to make, which I've been told is now in the open. So next year for Italian Tech Week 2024, Sam will actually be a special guest here, which is super exciting. I think you're planning to come to Torino for a few days. So you guys should definitely come back. We're looking forward to it.
Excited to be there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you
Very much.